2 years ago, the name Arthur Fleck hit Gotham like a hurricane.
Joker Folie Deux charges out of the gate with a novel approach to DC's most famous villain, but it soon settles into rote rhythms. Though advertised as a dreamy jukebox musical, the sequel to 2019's Joker is actually more of a courtroom drama, and not a very interesting one at that. The film works best when pushing toward new ways of seeing its central character, often through the eyes of a wonderfully realized Harley Quinn, played by Lady Gaga. But it too often insists on returning to familiar territory, and on occasion, familiar footage, instead of blazing a new path.
For once in my life, I have someone who needs me.
Arkham Asylum is now home to Joker/Arthur Fleck, whose daily routine involves being awoken by gruff prison guards who demand jokes from him while he empties his latrine. It seems like Arthur no longer speaks very much. He certainly no longer smiles. Director Todd Phillips, with the help of cinematographer Lawrence Sher, captures this mechanical mourning process in long, unbroken takes that draw the viewer into Joker's grimy world. As he awaits trial, his lawyer, played by Catherine Keener, insists he pleads insanity. She figures that the best defense is to treat Joker and Arthur as distinct personalities occupying the same body.
Hey Fleck, you got a joke for us today?
Arthur, like most people around him, knows this is more of a legal strategy than anything resembling the truth. But the question of how his adopted persona changes him constantly looms. On one hand, separating Joker's actions from Arthur's and framing them as a trauma response might get him an easier hearing. On the other hand, when he draws the gaze of fellow patient and avowed admirer Harleen Lee Quinzel, it seems like Joker is who he wants and needs to be.
For once in my life, I didn't feel so alone anymore.
Since the two meet during musical therapy, real and imagined songs are scattered throughout Folie Doux's runtime. These familiar Hollywood tunes and vintage pop hits are sung passionately by Joaquin Phoenix and Lady Gaga, and some are even mixed with Hildur Guðnadóttir's eerie, booming score. The duo, at first, connects through song. They match each other's freak, the shared madness and delusion of the subtitle, what the French call Folie Deux. But much of this ends up sidelined during the movie's lengthy courtroom scenes, which promise chaos when Arthur begins representing himself. Unfortunately, the delirium of Phoenix smearing on the grease paint to play both attorney and defendant isn't quite delivered.
What's changed, Arthur?
After an initial hour set entirely within Arkham's walls, the sequel becomes a kind of referendum on the first Joker, though not in any meaningful, transformative way. Rather, it's merely an extension of the first film's plot in the most plotting and literal fashion. For a film that's almost entirely liberated from its comic book source material, Joker Folie Deux is oddly constrained by its own predecessor. Returning characters show up to narrate events we've already seen, as Keener asks leading questions about Joker feeling like a distinct entity from Arthur. On the flip side, the prosecutor is a smarmy Harvey Dent, played by Industry's Harry Lawty. This version of the comic's villainous Two-Face is a treat to watch at all times, though his line of argument sheds little light on Arthur's actions or state of mind.
Let's get out of here.
Perhaps the standout of this extended segment is Gary, Arthur's clown colleague from the first movie, whose dwarfism comes ever so close to being the subject of Arthur's comedic riffing when he takes the stand. If the sequel comes close to articulating an actual point about Joker, that is to say the persona and identity, it's that the coping mechanism that shields Arthur from the world's cruelty makes him cruel in turn. However, like many potent ideas upon which Folie Deux touches, it's soon discarded. Similarly, Arthur's upbringing and abusive mother, detailed in Joker, are rehashed ad nauseum, while the topic of Arthur's future with Lee is quickly abandoned before it can offer any kind of thematic reflection.
Look around! Look at all these people!
This is the sequel's default MO, making it a frustrating experience beyond its initial Arkham-focused hour. At first, it creates a more careful and methodical aesthetic than Joker. Each scene is carefully composed, each methodical push-in has clear emotional intent. But as it progresses, it does little with its camera worth commenting upon. A few dreamlike flourishes do appear, though mostly to quote the familiar visuals of other musicals, like Jacques Demy's French New Wave landmark The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, and Francis Ford Coppola's sincere, expressionistic One from the Heart.
We use music to make us whole.
Apart from these stray references, Phillips' expressionism is limited to making each environment and lighting source resemble, in some way, a harsh spotlight on a stage, silhouetting Joker and Lee until they become defined by their shape, their iconography. It's a great idea in theory, and taps into the performance aspect associated with the Joker character, but it rarely evolves visually or conceptually. It's just one of several things that ends up keeping the character in stasis, to the point that a vital emotional turn in the second half, which defines the movie's trajectory, comes entirely out of left field. It's one movie, and then suddenly, it's another.
I want to see the real you.
That said, Phoenix clearly knows this character inside and out by now. His posture is even more disconcerting this time. The actor is still shockingly gaunt, but the way he carries himself speaks to a body that has endured a life of abuse. Something as simple as uneven shoulders can go a long way. When Arthur decides to embrace the Joker part of himself, this posture changes, almost fixing itself, as Phoenix sprawls out across the screen, luxuriantly, comfortably, and confidently, usually with a cigarette in hand. However, he never loses Arthur's inherent goofiness, even when putting on this front. As the Joker slips between forms of presentation, his accent slips as well, going from British to American Southern and back, as if he can't quite figure out who or what he wants to be.
Is a monster.
But if Joker Folie Deux has a not-so-secret weapon, it's Lady Gaga's rendition of Harley Quinn, whose fascination with Arthur is the film's very foundation. It's a shame the movie never quite allows its musical elements to bloom. The energy of these segments only goes so far, because affording Gaga the chance to run the emotional and tonal gamut would have likely resulted in one of the greatest feats of screen acting modern Hollywood has ever seen. She even modulates her singing voice between the real Lee, an unprofessional who belts with an uneven passion, and Arthur's imagined version of her, whose singing is more, well, Gaga-esque. Sadly, she's constrained by a subtle performance in a film that's anything but.
Let's give the people what they want.
The careful line she walks between adoration and mania is entirely worthwhile, and temporarily allows a commentary on fandom obsession to sneak its way into the picture. Lee is practically a Manson girl. However, in true Phillips fashion, this idea never really comes to fruition. Before it has the chance, Joker Folie Deux switches tangents yet again. That's to say nothing of the movie's intriguing Oedipal undercurrent, which frames Arthur's desire for adoration as a response to a lack of maternal warmth. No prizes for guessing how far this gets.
I got the sneaking suspicion that we're not giving the people what they want.
Joker, though scattered in its politics and committed to aping other, better filmmakers, at least had unifying visual and thematic motifs. It felt complete, albeit cobbled together. Joker Folie Deux departs from this approach, initially for better, though eventually for worse. Its more considered frames and character dynamics set the stage for musical romance that never blossoms, visually, acoustically, or emotionally, giving way to a sequel weighed down entirely by its predecessor, despite how hard it tries to escape its orbit.
How about you, Arthur? Do you still think you're a star?
The worst thing about Joker Folie Deux is its unfulfilled potential. It begins with the promise of a novel approach to the Joker and Harley Quinn, placing them in a world where the opposite of cruelty is musical romance. Unfortunately, the DC sequel gets bogged down by a lengthy courtroom saga, which not only keeps the dazzling Lady Gaga away from the spotlight, but centers the movie entirely around its own predecessor, without doing or saying anything new. For more movie reviews, check out what we thought of Beetlejuice and The Crow, and for everything else, stick with IGN.